Gonzaga will reportedly host the top-ranked high school player in the country on a visit, which begs the question, is Mark Few back in business on the recruiting trail?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. Well, Gonzaga is reportedly hosting a superstar prospect in the 2026 recruiting class. We're going to talk about that. Then, in the second and third segments of the show, we are going to complete our season in review series. Yes, I know Gonzaga's season ended close to 6 weeks ago, but it's taken us a while to get through all of these season review episodes. Today, we're talking about the big man in the middle, Graham Eke. We'll talk about his season last year. We'll also talk about what his role might look like next season, his final year in Spokane, now that he'll be starting alongside Braden Huff. We'll get to that to close out the show. But we're starting today with another recruiting update. Of course, coming off of the Zags landing a new recruit in the 2025 class in center Parker Jefferson, who decommitted from Minnesota and is now going to join the Zags for this upcoming season, part of a two-man 2025 recruiting class for the Zags, Jefferson, and of course, Davis Fogel. But right now, the Zags haven't been particularly active on the recruiting trail in the upcoming classes in 2026 or 2027 of that nature. But we've seen a few names floated here and there, but the biggest name, not only the biggest name connected to Gonzaga, but the biggest name, period, in the 2026 recruiting class, Tyran Stokes has been connected to Gonzaga. A recent report from Paul Biancardi of ESPN. He was writing about the top prospects in each of the subsequent recruiting classes, 26, 27, and 28. In his blurb about Tyran Stokes, Biancardi wrote that he has plans to visit Gonzaga. Stokes, we'll talk about him here. He's a 6'7", 245-pound wing. He is a big, strong, powerful dude. He's from Sherman Oaks, California right now, playing at Notre Dame High School, the same high school that Gonzaga recruited Dusty Stromer out of. From that Sherman Oaks area, a very good high school basketball program. Stokes did not begin his career at Notre Dame High School. He actually previously had played at Prolific Prep alongside AJ Dibansa, the number one recruit in the entire country, who's joining BYU this fall. And he also is initially from Louisville, Kentucky. So he's not a California native the way that Dusty Stromer was. He is playing at the same school, but does have connections elsewhere. And being from Kentucky, you've got to imagine that that's a pretty big advantage, not just for Kentucky, who has already had him on campus once and is slated to have him on campus again on May 15th through 17th. But Stokes has also already taken a visit to Louisville, which is where he's originally from, is Louisville. So certainly gives a bit of an advantage to Pat Kelsey and the Cardinals, as well as Mark Pope and the Wildcats. He is the consensus number one recruit in the 2026 class. Consensus number one. On3 has him one, 247 has him one, ESPN has him one. He is the top-ranked player in that class. And again, we mentioned he's already visited Kentucky once, visited Louisville once, set to visit Kentucky again. He has also visited Kansas, and he has plans to visit, according to Biancardi, Gonzaga, Oregon, and Arkansas. So this is a powerful group of programs that are in the mix right now for Tyran Stokes. The bluest blue bloods that you can possibly have that aren't in the ACC in Kansas and Kentucky, Louisville, and up-and-coming kind of new blood. They're not really a new blood. They're a former sort of blue blood, but now they're kind of back in the mix with what they've been doing under Coach Pat Kelsey. And then Arkansas and John Calipari, they're always in the mix. As long as Coach Cal's there, they're going to be in the mix for top-tier prospects. And Oregon's got a whole heap of Nike money that they're willing to toss around, so not surprised that they're in the mix here as well. Like we said, Tyran Stokes, 6'7", 245. This dude is built like a linebacker. He is big, he is strong, he is athletic, and he is powerful and explosive. You watch his clips. He is dunking on everybody. When he gets ahead of steam, when he is moving downhill, he is not movable. He is not stoppable. He is a tremendous athlete. But beyond that, there's more finesse to his game than I think a lot of people will give him credit for. I think that the projectability for Stokes at the college and even at the NBA level kind of hinges on some of those playmaking skills. And I think that is what makes him the best prospect in the country. A lot of players can out athlete other high schoolers, and they ultimately don't end up becoming great college players. Or maybe they out athlete people in college and they don't become good NBA players because you need more to your game. Eventually, you're going to get to a level where the other athletes are on the same level as you. And if you can't compete with your skill and your playmaking and your basketball IQ, you're going to struggle. I don't envision that being an issue for Tyran Stokes. For starters, his athleticism is enough that he's going to out-athlete people in college. But beyond that, his playmaking skills, his passing, he's a tremendous passer at hitting guys in stride, leading players, finding the right reads, making the right decisions with the basketball. He's grown tremendously in that space in the last couple of years. He's a good shooter, still working on the shot in terms of it being like at an elite level, but it's already at a good mark. He played for the Oakland Soldiers on the EYBL circuit this last summer, averaged 20.5 points, 9 boards, 3.5 assists, shot over 50% from the field, and shot over 40% from three. This is a kid who can do a little bit of everything. His size and strength makes him a good defender again. Improvement in that area will be based on how he responds when the athleticism is no longer overwhelmingly better than the competition around him. At that point, we will then see how much does he rely on, things outside of just his overall athleticism. Does he have a good, sense of when to go for steals? Is he making good reads defensively? Does he adjust well, move laterally well, things like that? But the expectation is that that's an area that he's going to be a plus at in college. And ideally, if he's being considered as a potential lottery pick at the NBA level as well. For Gonzaga, I don't know how likely they are here. They're on the list. That's always a good thing. But this is a player who's already had visits to powerful programs, to very rich programs, to programs that are in his hometown that have a lot of basketball history. But the Zags remain in pursuit of the best of the best. And I think that's a big part of the storyline here. A lot of people have felt like Gonzaga has given up on high school recruiting. They haven't. And whether this makes you feel better or not, the answer is not that Gonzaga has given up. It is that they have been missing. They have been missing on the guys they've been going after, but they have been going after high-profile players. They just have not been able to land them. I think there is a mix. I think there is a mix of Gonzaga genuinely putting all of their eggs in the basket of, we want this kid, we're going to try to do everything we can to land them, and just getting outbid. Whether it's financially getting outbid, whether it's just the pitch being better from somebody else, whether it's a combination of those two things, I do think there are chances where Gonzaga has done everything that they can and has failed to land certain kids. I think a lot of fans think that it's exclusively that. Gonzaga has poured everything into every player they have pursued, and they have failed to get all of them. That is a doomer style of thinking that I don't think is entirely accurate. I think that for a lot of these players, Gonzaga has pursued, but has reached a threshold. I know in the case of like Isaiah Harwell, a local kid who Gonzaga pursued for many years, who they continued to pursue after he got injured. Eventually, when he was still kind of waffling and thinking Houston or Gonzaga basically said, what else do you want us to do? Like, we have pursued you for this long. We have been interested in you for this long. If this is not enough, then we're kind of at our limit. And I think that that's what you have to do as a staff. You can't go, 110% for every single player you want to land, because you have a finite amount of resources, you have a finite amount of time and energy that you can spend on certain players. And I think for Gonzaga, they went hard after Isaiah Harwell. They went hard after Nick Kamenia. They went hard after Kingston Flemings, mostly kind of when they knew that they weren't going to land Isaiah Harwell, and figured, well, Flemings and Harwell are both connected to Houston. If Houston's going to get Harwell, we'll try to get Flemings. Did not work. Houston ended up getting both of them. But Gonzaga pursued those players pretty hard, but I do think it got to a point where they said, hey, we're at our limit. If somebody else, if this is not enough, we're out. Like, that's the limit that we're going to get to. Those are the players they missed out on in the 2025 class, but all those players were five-star, high-caliber players. In 2024, they pursued both Asen Newell from Georgia, who they faced in the NCAA tournament, as well as Zoom Diallo, who played at Washington. Newell wanted to play with his family, and his brother was at Georgia. Diallo wanted to play close to home in Seattle. Also got reportedly a huge bag of money from the University of Washington, an amount of money that Gonzaga was not going to give to a true freshman coming in. So again, I think it's Gonzaga going after the best of the best. Gonzaga going after the 5 stars, to me, is still a good thing. And yes, it means that they're going to swing and miss. And sometimes it means that they swing their absolute hardest and miss. And sometimes it means that they pursue up to a certain point, and then they kind of let the chips fall where they're going to fall. I think Gonzaga is going to continue to prioritize transfer portal additions over high school recruiting for a couple of reasons. One, they are a team that's continuing to be in a win now mode, so they want to add talent that's going to contribute right away. And two, they have their finite amount of resources. I don't think that they're as poor as maybe some people think that they are, but they're not spending $15 million like Kentucky is. Like there's just no way that they're spending that amount of money. So they're not going to be able to compete if they're dropping huge bags on 5-star freshmen that Gonzaga is maybe not going to be able to be willing to or even able to spend as much money on. But I think beyond that, Gonzaga is also really good at identifying underranked talent, specifically in the high school ranks. Drew Timme was barely a top 50 prospect in his recruiting class. Braden Huff was barely top 100. Corey Kispert was not top 100. Those are just 3 examples, but they're recent examples of Gonzaga's incredible success with high school domestic recruiting for underranked players. It's why I'm confident about Davis Fogels, why I'm confident about Parker Jefferson, because those are the kind of players that Gonzaga has found and had a lot of success with in the not too recent past. You love the 5 stars. You love when they land a Chet Holmgren or a Jalen Suggs or a Hunter Salas. You love it. I love it. We all love it. But this team has had a ton of success recruiting outside of that 5-star gap, and they will continue to have that success. Doesn't mean I wouldn't be thrilled beyond measure if they land Tyran Stokes. Trust me, we're going to have a whole dang party on Locked On Zags if Tyran Stokes commits to Gonzaga. But if he doesn't, it is not the end of the world. It is not the end of the world. They will find talent. They do find talent. High school recruiting, international recruiting, transfer portal recruiting, they find it, they make it work. I am happy they're continuing to pursue the very best of the best, and I hope that they continue to do so while understanding that it's never been how Gonzaga has built their program, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they will continue to do it, and they're going to continue to do it the way that they want to do it, even in the modern era. And if that doesn't include 5-star talent, it doesn't include 5-star talent. They've had a lot of success without having a ton of that in the past, and I think they'll continue to do so. Speaking of non-5-star talent, Graham Eke, folks, he was a 0-star recruit out of high school. Of course, he didn't come straight to Gonzaga. We're going to get into that. Where did he go? What happened at Wyoming? What happened last year for the Zags? We're going to talk about his history and then take a look at what next season might look like for the big man in Spokane. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help take your business to the next level. And Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. So whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, you can have multiple qualified candidates to choose from. So instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our conversation about Tyran Stokes and Gonzaga's recruiting philosophy in the current era of college basketball to instead complete our season review series where we talked about every player on Gonzaga's roster last year, how they performed during the season, and we're also kind of taking a look at their future. For some of them, their future is moving on to the professional ranks. For some of them, their future is transferring, as we've seen with Dusty Stromer and Michael Ajayi and Jun Suk Yo. And some of them, their future is what does next year look like in Spokane, because we know they're returning to the roster. That'll be the case for Graham Eke, but before we get to that, we're going to talk about Graham's history, a lengthy history in the college basketball space. Eke was a 6'9" big man out of Aurora, Colorado. He was a 0-star prospect out of high school. He got injured during his senior season, had virtually no attention from the Division I level, but he did get recruited by Jeff Linder at the University of Wyoming, and he ultimately committed to Wyoming in the Mountain West Conference. Because he had suffered that injury in high school, he only played 12 games as a true freshman at Wyoming in the 2020-21 COVID season. So that season does not count against Graham, in part because it was not a full season, in part because it was the COVID year, and you get that extra eligibility out of the way anyway. He was productive, by the way, in those 12 games. Clearly looked immediately from his first time stepping onto a floor at the Division I level, like, oh, this kid belongs. Like he looked good immediately for Wyoming, and that bared itself out instantly in his second season when he was fully healthy and he broke out as a sophomore for Wyoming in a major way. This is during the 21-22 season. Graham Eke was one of the best mid-major bigs in all of college basketball. For Wyoming, he averaged 19.5 points per game, 9.5 rebounds per game, a little over 1 assist. He earned all Mountain West Conference honors, and he was expected to come into the 22-23 season, his junior year. He was the preseason favorite to be Mountain West Conference Player of the Year. Everybody had penciled him in. This is our preseason pick. We did it on Locked On College Basketball. Everybody was like, Graham Eke is going to win this award. And then he got hurt. Another injury, this time to his foot, took him out for the entire season. He did not play a single second of basketball. He was kind of expected to come back in the middle of the year, ultimately suffered a setback, and just ended up wiping out his entire sophomore season. So he only played 12 games as a freshman, did not play, and then had a massive breakout season as a sophomore. And then in that junior year for Wyoming, Graham Eke doesn't get to play at all. After the season, he decides to enter the transfer portal. He is connected to Gonzaga pretty much right away. And in a glorious weekend, Gonzaga landed both Graham Eke and Ryan Nembhard from Creighton in the transfer portal. Those two ended up being the catalyst for the two most recent seasons in Gonzaga basketball history. Of course, Nembhard, we spoke about him very recently in his prolific seasons, and particularly last season for the Zags. But Graham came in right away and was outstanding for Gonzaga too. And he deserves a lot of credit for what he was able to do in each of his 2 seasons so far at Gonzaga, because they've been incredibly similar. And it was shocking when putting these notes together to look at like how similar his stats were as a junior at Gonzaga last year, and then as a senior, his first senior year, this past season, these past 2 years, very similar. In his first year in Spokane, Eke averaged 16.5 points, 7.5 boards, and about 1 assist in 24 minutes per game. Again, I think so much of Graham Eke's statistical profile needs to be evaluated through the lens of playing time. When you look at per 40 data, which is where you extrapolate a player's statistics based on if they played a full 40 minutes, Graham's numbers are staggering. So are Braden Huff's, because they're both low. They're really high usage players when they're on the floor, but they both don't play very many minutes. Like Braden played like 17 minutes a game last year. Graham played 22, 23 minutes per game last year. Like these guys don't play huge minutes, in part because of foul trouble, in part because of just they have the depth with Eke and Huff to play them off of each other and not play either of them a huge role. And it worked splendidly. So in Ike's first year at Gonzaga, again, 16.5 points, 7.5 boards. He was 62% on 2-pointers. He was 37% from 3. He was 78.5% from the free throw line. Highly efficient offensive player. He was all WCC. He was snubbed for WCC Player of the Year, the first of 2 snubs by Eke in favor of Augustus Marcellonis, simply because St. Mary's finished higher than Gonzaga in the standings, and they kind of just default to give it to the best player on the best team. And while nobody's debating that St. Mary's was the better team, I think we can debate whether Graham Eke was the better player, but that is not here or there. Graham came back for his senior year, his first senior year, and again, super similar numbers. 22.9 minutes per game. So he played a little bit less this last year, but he averaged 17.3 points, 7.3 boards, 1.4 assists. So about a half assist more per game, about 0.8 more points per game in less minutes, but his effectiveness was more or less the same. 62% on 2s, almost exactly the same as his first season. 39.5% from 3, but this was on less than 1 attempt per game. And then a little better from the free throw line, which is remarkable. He was 78.5% his first year, then less last year. Again, people talk about the Caleb Battles free throw shooting, obviously a huge storyline for Gonzaga last year. Graham Eke took 5 free throw attempts per game, and he shot 80.5%. That is incredible. For a big man to shoot free throws at over 80%, a big man who's adept at drawing contact, who's great at getting, he had that game where he had, I think, 16 points at the free throw line against San Diego. Like he is a force down low. And the fact that you can, when he does get fouled, you know he's going to get you points at the line. I mean, it's just such a huge weapon. Gonzaga has a huge history of great bigs at the free throw line, and Graham is one of the best. Again, he was snubbed for WCC Player of the Year, like we talked about. But one of the things I loved about Graham's year last year, is that he really played up in big games. And a lot of players draw criticism for that. Like, oh, like when Gonzaga loses games, I'm like, sure, when you lose to the same areas or you lose to those teams that slow you down, you tend to see worse offensive performances. But Graham had great games against great teams. He had 25 or more points in 6 games last year. Here were those 6 games: 28 points, 11 boards against Kentucky, 27 points, 9 rebounds at LMU. Not a great opponent, but a true road game. 27 points, 10 rebounds versus San Francisco in the WCC tournament. 27 points, 5 rebounds versus Houston in the NCAA tournament. 26 points and 9 rebounds in that agonizing road loss against Oregon State. 25 points, 10 rebounds versus Bucknell. That's it. That's the only 25-point game that wasn't at least some level of difficulty. Again, at LMU is not the most difficult game, but it's also not the easiest game either for Gonzaga. He also had 24 points against UCLA, had 24 points at St. Mary's, 24 points at Santa Clara, and 23 points, 20 of them coming in the second half at San Diego State. That is pretty much a list of all of Gonzaga's toughest games, and Graham Eke was at his very best. There are very few exceptions. He did not play well against UConn. 3 points in that game. He did not play well against West Virginia. 4 points in that game. Foul trouble being the main drivers of those struggling performances. But for the most part, in the 2 years that Graham Eke has been at Gonzaga, and particularly last year, he has been a reliable option for the Zags in their toughest games. Nothing encapsulated that more than his dominant performance, nearly willing Gonzaga to a comeback win over the Houston Cougars in the second round of the NCAA tournament. No big played that well against Houston all season long, especially in the tournament. Nobody was better against the Houston Cougars, a team that went to the national championship game. Nobody was better against them than Graham Eke. Truly, he was outstanding in that game. And now he's back. If you listened to the show last year, you know that throughout the season, I frequently said I didn't think Graham Eke was going to come back. I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong, and I've been truly, truly happy to admit when I'm wrong about something like this, because it is great news for Gonzaga that Graham Eke is back for another year. Both of the last 2 seasons have looked very similar. Is that going to be the case again in year 3? Or will the fact that Braden Huff's now starting alongside him change Graham Eke's role? We're going to talk about that to close out the show coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. So whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live during the game. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And folks, if you're feeling real good about this Gonzaga roster, Graham's back, Braden's back, we finally added a transfer in Adam Miller. If you're feeling juicy about the Zags, they are plus 4,000 at FanDuel right now to win the 2026 National Championship. Might be a good time to get in on the action. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up, because you can head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're closing out our final season review episode, talking about every player on Gonzaga's roster last year. Today, we're talking Graham Eke. We just talked about his history from a 0-star prospect in Colorado to Mountain West preseason player of the year pick at Wyoming to a dominant force for the Gonzaga Bulldogs last year. Now we know Graham's coming back for his final season of eligibility, and we want to talk about what is that going to look like for Graham in one more go-round. And I say final year of eligibility just to explain it, because his is very odd. That first season at Wyoming, 2020-21, does not count because it is the COVID year. But then that second season, 21-22, he played 33 games. That counts. The next year, 22-23, he sat out the entire season, so that does not count. And then he's had the last 2 seasons at Gonzaga. So he had 1 full season at Wyoming, 2 full seasons at Gonzaga. This year will be his 3rd full season at Gonzaga. That's your 4 years. Boom. He is done after this. But it's great that he's back. And it's great that he and Braden Huff are both back. And as we talked about in the Braden Huff preview or review episode last week, the final 3 games of the season, Gonzaga's win over St. Mary's in the WCC tournament, Gonzaga's win over Georgia in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and then their loss to Houston a few days later. The starting lineup in those games involved both Graham Eke and Braden Huff. And while I think it was done mostly to throw St. Mary's off and then to mitigate Houston and Georgia's size in the front court, I think it was also a bit of an audition for those 2 players to kind of prove, hey, you can play together, because Braden Huff did not want to come back for another year at Gonzaga as a backup. I assume. That wasn't explicitly stated, but I would not blame him for looking in the transfer portal if he felt he was going to be a backup center for another year. Likewise, Graham Eke probably felt like, oh, well, I don't need to come back because Braden's going to step into my role anyway. But Mark Few said, look, you guys can play together and I'm willing to do it. Let's see if you guys want to run it back and try this thing again, because we knew Ben Gregg was going to be gone. I think the staff probably knew that Mike Lejaye was going to be gone. So it made sense. And it worked. In those 3 games, it looked great. But the question is, can that work sustainably for a full season? And I think that's the big question, because we know if Graham Eke is in the same role, we know what we're going to get. We've seen it 2 years in a row, 23 to 25 minutes per game, 16, 17 points, 8-ish rebounds, very efficient around the rim, decent 3-point shooter, but not a high volume 3-point shooter, great free throw shooter, good at drawing contact. I mean, more outside of the statistical profile, we know we're going to see a very emotional player. We're going to see a guy who's, going to need to be reined in a little bit, but who can take over and dominate games at a really high level. But what does that look like with Braden Huff starting alongside him? Because Braden Huff is not the same type of big as Ben Gregg. He's not the same type of big as Anton Watson, the 4s that Graham Eke is more used to playing alongside, who were more comfortable with the ball away from the rim, who didn't do most of their damage by scoring right at the cup the way that Braden Huff has. Now you have 2 players who are both very, very good low post scorers, neither of whom are particularly comfortable or familiar playing a lot of time away from the rim. That does not mean that they can't, but they haven't really done that. And I think that's what I'm most curious about. Who of these 2 plays the 4 at Gonzaga? My assumption has kind of been that Graham will play the 5 and that Braden will be asked to adjust and play more of that kind of 4 role. But I don't know that that's true. Graham was the better 3-point shooter last year, but again, neither of them shot enough of a volume of 3s for it to be particularly significant. And I don't think that you take Graham away from the rim, where he's so good at drawing contact, where he's so good at getting to the free throw line, where he's such a good rebounder. I don't think you remove him from all of that in order to let Braden get down there, even though Braden is an incredibly efficient low post scorer. Braden's not as good of a rebounder. He's not as good at drawing contact and getting to the free throw line. And I think losing those skills from Graham would be problematic for this team. But I also think there's going to be some mixing and matching. If you recall, for folks who watched the St. Mary's game in the WCC championship, one of the things that Gonzaga did while starting those 2 players is they let Braden go to work against Paulus Morauskas, who's the power forward for St. Mary's. St. Mary's obviously had Mitchell Saxon on Graham Eke, and they had Henry Wessels on the bench and could have used him, but they didn't play the 2 bigs together. And since Gonzaga did, one of them had a mismatch. And I do think that's something we'll see Gonzaga do more this year. If there's a 7-foot player who's a good defender, a good shot blocker guarding Graham Eke, and there's a 6'8" power forward guarding Braden Huff, then you pull Graham out and you let him dump the ball down to Braden, and you let Braden go to work against a smaller defender. That's, again, what Gonzaga did against St. Mary's, and it worked effectively. Now, the counter to this, and something I'm very interested in, especially with Gonzaga's current roster construction, the counter to this is zone. And I'm curious if teams will run more zone defense against Gonzaga, because matching up with the 2 6'10" bigs who are great scorers around the rim is just a difficult task, particularly for WCC teams. I think some of the other teams, like the non-conference teams, will be more equipped to handle the size of Braden and Graham, especially with Braden not being a particularly physical player. I think that power conference teams will have a 6'9" big who's strong enough to handle Braden, even if he's got a little bit of size on them. But I am really interested if we will see teams try to go zone, especially with Gonzaga not shooting it all that well last year. If Steele Venters is healthy, if Adam Miller shoots like he did at Arizona State, I think you feel a lot better about your ability to beat a zone defense. But it is something I've kind of been thinking about of like, oh, that's probably how I would counter it if I was a coach and they had these two monsters. Now, St. Mary's also literally just an hour or a day before I recorded this show, they landed Jazz Gardner from Pacific in the transfer portal. Gardner is a 7-foot center who started at Pacific last year. Frankly, he's not a great player, but he's 7 feet. And I think that St. Mary's is going after a 7-footer when they already have Wessels, when they already have McKeever, who's a 7-footer off the bench. They're bringing in size to counter what Gonzaga is going to do this year. Like that's what St. Mary's is doing. I don't blame them for that, but I am really interested to see kind of how Gonzaga approaches this stylistically with the two bigs, whether Huff's continually away from the rim, whether it's Graham continually away from the rim, whether they're just both down there. It might look kind of similar to 2017 when the Zags had Shemek Karnowski and Jonathan Williams, neither who were great floor spacers. Williams could hit a mid-range, but he didn't space it out to three. And I think the big question partly is defensively with those two guys, which I am concerned about, but also from a passing perspective, like Karnowski was a great passer. So you could line him up on the block with Domantas Sabonis, and those two guys could make those passes to and from each other. Can Graham and Braden do that? There have been teammates for a long time, but they haven't played a lot of minutes together. So that's something I think is a big question coming into this season. Looking more broadly at Graham Ike's upcoming season, the expectation is that he'll put up similar numbers if he plays a little bit more, 26, 27 minutes, if he's capable of staying on the floor for that long. I think you could see him put up 18 and 8, something like that. Augustus Marcelonis is out the door, so I think Graham Ike is your favorite to win the WCC Player of the Year this upcoming season. We'll see, if Gonzaga can win the WCC, that's an important part of it. But if they're able to do that, I think Graham's the very likely winner of that award. And then in terms of Graham's future, I've said this before, but I'll say it here too. I don't think he's an NBA player. He doesn't have the size, like his size is great in the WCC. He's a decent college size big, but he's like 6'9". He's strong, but is the NBA strong at that size? Probably not. And they don't like back to the basket low post scores in the NBA, so we need to prove he can space the floor. Again, he shot 38% in 2 seasons at Gonzaga, but on almost no volume. I just don't see the profile of an NBA player here. I think he'd make a great European big. I could see him sticking around in the G League if that's what he wanted to do, but Graham Ike is not going to be an NBA player, but he's probably going to have a prolific professional career overseas. And as a guy who was not recruited by almost anybody out of high school, that's a pretty darn good trajectory for Graham. And he's been a really fun player, albeit frustrating at times, but fun player to root for. And I'm really looking forward to watching his final season in Spokane, and particularly how it goes with him starting alongside Braden Huff. That is going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast, though. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, hopefully, for these live shows. We got some transfers to talk about. A new player Gonzaga is pursuing in the portal. We'll get to that, and some NBA Zag stuff, some Lady Zag editions as well. All that coming up tomorrow at this time. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a great rest of your day. And until next time, as always, go Zags.